Welcome to a special broadcast here at the MeidasTouch Network. We have some special guests on this special broadcast. We have Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, Governor Laura Kelly of Kansas. We have two Democratic governors who are going to be discussing the disastrous Trump and GOP budget bill and how it is impacting their states. So everybody, don't get distracted. There's a lot of distractions out there. But let's talk through this budget bill and its implications. It's critical. A new Quinnipiac poll that just came out shows that opposition of this bill is at 53% and support of this bill is at 27%, with 20% of people having no opinion. Well, I think those people with no opinions should be watching and should be having some opinions. So we have two Democratic governors from states that unfortunately did vote for Trump in 2024. Michigan was a closer race. Kansas, not so close, 57% for Trump, 42% for former Vice President Kamala Harris. But while we have two Democratic governors here, I really just want to understand the impact of the people in their states. I want to cut through, is this a Democrat, Republican? How is this just impacting human beings here? Because we hear about the tens of millions of Americans losing health care, losing supplemental food assistance, losing rental and housing assistance, major cuts to research, major cuts in agriculture, major cuts in education, and billionaires are getting tax cuts, trillions of dollars in tax cuts, while low-income and working-class Americans are getting screwed. Also, gun silencers and tanning beds are getting the extra perks, while lunches are being ripped from the mouths of children. So let's start off by asking each governor just to give opening remarks on their perspective of the budget bill and the impact it's having in their states. Governor Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan, let's hear from you first.
I won the flip, huh? Okay, good. I'm grateful to be here with you. I'm grateful for all the work that MeidasTouch is doing to educate the public. And of course, I'm grateful to my incredible friend and colleague, Governor Kelly. Hi, everyone. In Michigan, Medicaid provides health coverage to more than 2.6 million Michigan residents, including 1 million children. These are our friends and our neighbors. These are people who are battling cancer. These are veterans who are disabled. It's the family next door. It might be you and your household. The GOP is rushing to terminate health care coverage for millions of Americans as fast as possible. Rushing these cuts through will hurt those who can least afford it and won't do anything to lower our health care costs. Every one of us pays when Congress rips this health care away from people. And the Republican budget will make the largest cuts to Medicaid in history. So what does it look like? Well, it looks like providers who have to close their doors. It looks like reducing the quality of services. It means terminating coverage for kids and postpartum women. And make no mistake, families in Michigan and all across the country, we're going to feel the effects of this bill in our day-to-day lives. I'm always talking to Michiganders. I have a huge compilation of people that have reached out to tell their story. Thousands of people, over 15,000 people. And there's a woman from East Point in Emily who was telling me about how losing access to Medicaid is going to cause her to lose access to health care and force a lifelong struggle with debt, forcing herself and her kids to choose which medication or bills they're going to be able to pay for that month. We got a woman from Andrea who told me about her daughter and how they're going to lose coverage completely. And she hasn't even had her first round of vaccines yet. Talking about an infant who was going to lose access to healthcare. So we should be working across the aisle to make healthcare better and easier to afford, like we did in Michigan. And we worked across the aisle to enact Helping Michigan, Michigan's Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. And almost 1 million people today have coverage because of that work. It was a Republican governor at the time, and me as the Democratic leader in the Senate. We worked together to do it because it was the right thing for Michiganders in terms of expanding healthcare. It also was a smart thing. When you get a healthier population, they can work, they can participate in the economy, they can take care of themselves and their families. Last year, we codified portions of the ACA into Michigan law, protecting Michiganders with pre-existing conditions, letting children stay on their parents' insurance until they're 26, and guaranteeing essential health services in all health insurance plans. If Republicans in Congress truly want to see improvements that lower costs and help more families afford coverage, I'm all for it. But this bill is going to do the opposite. And families in my home state and all across the country are going to pay the price.
Thank you very much. And Governor Laura Kelly of Kansas, let's hear your opening remarks.
Well, thanks, Ben. It is really great to be here with you today and alongside my fellow governor, Gretchen Whitmer. Earlier this summer, Republicans in Congress passed an extreme budget that is expected to slash Medicaid funding by billions of dollars over the next 10 years and gut funding for critical food assistance programs, all while passing tax handouts to the ultra-wealthy and exponentially exploding the national deficit. As the Senate stands poised to pass the same budget, cementing it into law, it's important to understand just how dangerous this bill will be for the people in our states. Over 440,000 Kansans, including pregnant women, seniors, children, veterans, and individuals with disabilities, rely on Medicaid for quality, affordable health care. Making deep cuts to this program would endanger the health care of our most vulnerable. It would also be particularly devastating to our rural providers who are already struggling to keep their doors open. The bill will also cut other critical programs like SNAP, which helps feed our state's children and puts food on the table for working families. The attack on food assistance is not only bad policy, it's just plain cruel. The notion that states will respond to massive cuts to federally appropriated dollars by backfilling with state resources is just total bunk. The states don't have the money to do that. These are not cost shifts to states. These are cuts to critical programs that hundreds of thousands of Kansans rely on. These cuts will impact Democrats and Republicans, red states and blue states alike. This proposed budget also drastically increases the federal deficit. It's expected to add over $3 trillion to the national debt over the next 10 years. That's irresponsible. It will weaken our economy, and it is not sustainable. Both Governor Whitmer and I, and all of the other Democratic governors across the country, have stood united against this very big, very ugly, and very dangerous bill. We will continue to call on our congressional delegations to stand up for their constituents and reject this reckless legislation.
Thank you, Governor Kelly. And back to you, Governor Kelly. You are a Democratic governor, and as I mentioned at the beginning, in a red state. I mean, you have to...
You noticed.
You have to bring people together. And of course, Governor Whitmer, you have to as well. But Governor Kelly, can you speak to the dynamic there, though, and give us the secret, if you will, of how you do it, how you're communicating with a lot of people? Because as you mentioned, the congressional delegation there, by and large, the Republicans, they're pushing this big, disastrous budget bill forward, and it's going to harm their constituents. And you, as the governor, are saying, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Talk us through that.
Well, it is very concerning what is happening with all the congressional delegations and even mine here in the state of Kansas. We have a primarily Republican congressional delegation. We have one Democrat out of 6. We have been working closely with our Democrat delegate, but also whatever Republican congressional representative will work with us. And we've been successful in working particularly with Senator Moran to mitigate some of the damage that has been done, to undo some of the damage that has been done. He jumped right in when the whole USAID program was defunded, and he was able to work with the Trump administration and restore some of that funding, put it in a different place, but restore some of that funding. So not only would the folks who are on the receiving end of that aid benefit, but also our farmers. We have farmers here in the state of Kansas. They grow their crops to sell to the USAID to feed folks across the ocean. So, it's important that we do that. I would like to do more. I would like for them to particularly on the Senate side, they have an opportunity now with that bill on their side to make drastic changes or to just kill it. I think it probably would be easier to just kill it and start over. Do I think there are things that need to be done on the federal level to reduce costs? Of course I do. I'm a deficit hawk, and I think that just as we've done here in Kansas, balancing our budget, putting away for the rainy day, I think the federal government ought to be doing the same thing. And I think there's a way that they can do it. But this whole DOGE approach and this horrible reconciliation bill is not the way. They need to start over and do it in a way that is productive and that works and that is sustainable.
Governor Whitmer, how are you dealing with the congressional delegation in your state? I mean, they must know deep down, and their hearts are probably not deep down, probably pretty far up, that this is going to actually harm their constituents, but they're out there in kind of this cosplay, whatever Trump is saying, we do, and big, beautiful bill. We like the name. It's beautiful. It's big. They go on TV. They have their talking points that they do all the time. But they know they're selling out their constituents. So how do you speak to them and say, you're literally taking the people in your district off of healthcare?
That's what I'm saying. I'm not going to mince words. These stakes are too high. We need to kill the bill before it starts killing Americans by ripping healthcare away from people who desperately rely on it. And if we can't kill the bill, then I want to make sure every one of them owns it. When a rural hospital doesn't make it, when they have to close their doors, when people are turned away, I want to make sure people know who inflicted that harm. But my first job is to try to make it better. And that's why we are working so hard with, Laura and me and all of our Democratic colleagues across the country. I think one of the most maddening things in this moment is that there's very little courage on the other side of the aisle to take this on, and it will devastate every state in the nation. It'll blow a massive hole in every single state's budget. But you only get the Democratic governor standing up on behalf of the people. And we're going to continue to fight, and we're going to hold people accountable if they make a vote like this again. But it is really discouraging. I can tell you, we've got two great U.S. senators, Gary Peters and Alyssa Slotkin. They will do the right thing on behalf of the people of Michigan and on behalf of Americans everywhere. But our work is to make sure that the Republicans in the U.S. Congress and the U.S. Senate in particular are hearing from us, are hearing people's stories, who understand what this is going to mean. Because, Ben, this obviously is going to impact people who lose their health care, who get it through Medicaid. It's also going to impact every one of us who is fortunate enough to have the health care through our job or through another mechanism. When you don't have specialties in hospitals because the hospital closes, everyone's impacted. If you live in a rural area and you have a heart attack and you've got to get to an emergency department, and the nearest one is now 3 hours away instead of 1 hour away, it could be life or death, regardless of your ability to pay. So that's, I think, a really important point that everyone needs to understand is this isn't one part of a population that is going to pay the price for this horrible policy coming from the Republicans in Washington, D.C. It's every one of us.
With all of the unfolding developments we see now, the importance of governors more than ever. So my next question is just going to be what you're doing to stand up for your state in other areas as well. We know how you're standing up for your state here as it relates to the budget bill, but with all the other kind of threats out there generally and people looking to the leaders of the state to stand up for their state, what are you doing to stand up? So I've been going back and forth, but Governor Whitmer, I'll start with you over here, and then we'll go with Governor Kelly. So Governor Whitmer, what are you doing in all the other areas to stand up for yourself?
Well, there are a lot of things. And I, one of the things I love about Governor Kelly is, we have very similar backgrounds, very similar politics to have to manage in states that can be challenging. But building out affordable housing, feeding every child in Michigan breakfast and lunch at school every day. Making Michigan a place where we are moving forward and fixing our damn roads, the infrastructure that everyone relies on. It disproportionately hurts people who are in the margins socioeconomically, and that's why that matters so much. It is 72 hours ago, I walked in the Detroit City Motor City Pride Parade. And last year or 2 years ago, we expanded full civil rights protections for the LGBTQ community. I'm so proud that we did that, not just because it's the right thing to do, not just because it's good for the Michigan economy, not just because I'm the mother of a gay woman, but because as I walked that parade and hugged people who are so scared and are being villainized and attacked by those in Washington, D.C., they know Michigan is a place that everyone is welcome, and that doing that work is how we protect Michiganders, even in this really hard, awful moment that we're navigating.
Thank you. And Governor Kelly, same question for you. What are you doing in the other areas to stand up for Kansas?
Yeah, I think we are taking a very similar approach to Governor Whitmer, is that we are not allowing all this craziness at the federal level to distract us from the work that we can and should and must get done here at home. I have been laser focused on growing our economy since the day I got into office, knowing that if I didn't grow the economy, I couldn't fund our schools, I couldn't build our roads, I couldn't expand broadband, I couldn't do all the kinds of things that really needed to happen here, and I wanted to happen. So we focused on economic development. We have brought in the most new capital investment in the history of our state, most new jobs in the history of our state, and that is continuing. We've still got our pedal to the metal, and on an almost daily basis now, we're announcing new growth here in the state. We're trying to stay focused on that because we know in the end that's probably the most important thing that we can do for the people of Kansas. That we grow and make our state prosper, and then that can all filter down to each individual Kansan. In terms of dealing with the crazy that's coming out of Washington, I think what I have tried to do is to remain a very steady force, not be reactionary, not panic, not respond aggressively to what's going on, but rather, taking a very measured approach, a very wait and see approach, because we know just from the few months that we've been experiencing this, that, an announcement that's made today may be pulled back tomorrow. And so I'm trying to help my agencies, and I'm trying to help my constituents to, have the ability to focus on their lives or their jobs, and let me take care of the response to the feds, and filter that down to them as need be, rather than creating whiplash as a new edict comes down and then is pulled back. We'll probably talk about tariffs here in a little bit, but that's one fantastic example of things that are said one day and pulled back the next. We can't respond on a daily basis to all of that kind of stuff. We really have to take a wait and see to what is actually going to happen, rather than what's put out there.
Let's talk about tariffs quickly impacting both of your states. Governor Kelly, how's the Trump trade war against the world and the on-again, off-again tariffs, how's that impacting your state? How's it impacting agriculture? How are businesses, how are farmers adapting to this?
Well, I can tell you that my farmers and my ranchers are not very happy people here. They deal with a lot of uncertainty, in just a routine year, whether it's the weather or wildfires or whatever else it might be. So, to have this other uncertainty put on top of all of that really is not at the least bit helpful and not welcomed by my farmers and ranchers. I mentioned the USAID program and the impact that had on a number of our farmers. We also our biggest trade partners are Canada and Mexico, and so having tariffs imposed on those two countries in particular, others also, but particularly those, huge impact on us. I mean, my farmers rely on fertilizer from Canada. My contractors rely on lumber from Canada. There's just so, and the fruits and vegetables and other kinds of things feed our families. Many of those come from Mexico. So we're really interdependent. And I recognize that I think I was the only Democrat governor to sign on to the United States Canada-Mexico trade agreement that Trump pushed through in his first term. And I signed on to that, recognizing that it was incredibly important to my state to have that arrangement. And so I wish this administration would go back to that more solid, common sense approach, thoughtful approach to dealing with trade with with other countries, rather than this really hit or miss, chaotic, punitive approach that works for nobody.
Governor Whitmer, same question for you, and I'll add this. So the MeidasTouch Network and the MeidasTouch podcast, #1 network and #1 podcast in Canada, the Maple Meidas. So we hear from Canadians all the time, and they view Trump's rhetoric when he says 51st state and things like that, really not just as a trade war language, but as a threat on their sovereignty, on their existence. And, they talk about the boycott, they talk about not traveling, and you're right there at the border. So what's going on in your state, and how are you navigating these difficult issues?
First, I'll just say this. The Michigan economy and the Canadian economy are so intertwined. And Michigan, being such a big manufacturing state who disproportionately does automotive manufacturing, and our number 2 industry is agriculture. We've got the second most diverse agriculture in the country. These things make us the most vulnerable state in the nation to tariffs. And Governor Kelly, I'll tell you, all of us governors are competitive. We have friendly competition. No one wants to win this competition. Michigan is the most vulnerable to this unpredictable tariff policy that is ever changing, to the insulting language and posture that Washington, D.C. has taken toward Canada. In Michigan, if you've ever been to a hospital in Detroit, odds are you've been taken care of by a Canadian nurse. I mean, that's how intertwined we are. We look at Canadians as our cousins. And so this has been incredibly damaging to our economy, to businesses' ability to plan, to make investments. The idea of bringing more manufacturing jobs back to the United States, that's great. I love that idea. Is there a role for tariffs in national policy? Sure, there's always been tariffs since George Washington. But having policy that actually makes sense, that gives business some predictability, that doesn't screw the average person by watching the stock market go up and down and people who are watching their retirement dwindle because there's no articulated policy or goal here, much less something that is static that everyone can adjust to. And I think for all these reasons, it's been especially hard on Michigan. We know that there are employers who have had to lay off, that there are businesses that aren't making investments because they're waiting for things to settle down. We're still working our tails off, and we're going to continue to have, I think some victories and diversify our economy. But it's really, this uncertainty is incredibly damaging. And the Canadian-American relationship, I'm very worried about how do we mend it when it's been so abusive and destructive and insulting. We love Canadians.
Let's go to the closing remarks. Governor Kelly, you were second in the outset, so I'll go to you first here for the closing remarks. Just what's your final message to the people in your state, to the people watching? We also have a big, as I noted, international audience here as well. And so this may be some of the people's first time, getting to meet you and get to know you as well. And to hear, wow, there's a Democratic governor in a red state like Kansas, to tell it, how are you able to navigate that? So we'd love to hear your closing remarks. And again, thank you for being on and doing this town hall.
Well, and thank you, Ben. This has been fun. And to all of our international listeners, I would like to say that, Kansas has been a very aggressively developing relationships all across this world, and we have found great partnerships. I've mentioned Canada, I mentioned Mexico, but we have terrific partnerships now in Japan and in Germany and Ireland and Korea, and I could go on and on. We have focused on that like a laser, and we've enjoyed those relationships, and we want to maintain them. And we ask that you just, this too shall pass. And this is what I also say to folks here in the state of Kansas, whether it's to my cabinet secretaries or to my constituents, is that this is a horrible time in American history. But I'm old enough that I've lived through some other horrible times in American history. And particularly think about the Vietnam War and how tumultuous things were then. It really did feel like the country was falling apart. And I know for a lot of people, it feels that way now. I just, maybe I'm a bit of a Pollyanna, but I've got to feel that, the United States is strong enough. Our people are diverse enough and care enough that we can withstand this by staying focused on the things that matter on a day in and day out basis. And then also, on the other hand, fighting back against the things that are just so overtly wrong, often illegal, that are going on, and hope that our court system works with us to see us through the next few years and let us come out even stronger than we are now.
Governor Whitmer, your closing remarks.
Yeah, well, thanks, Ben. And Governor Kelly, I always love sharing a stage with you, even virtually. I would just say this. I think, like a lot of people, I continue to think of the wisdom of the serenity prayer, right? Checking out is an option. We've got to mobilize. We've got to focus on what we can do. And right now, what we can do is try to kill the Medicaid cuts that are being debated in Congress right now. What we can do is tell our stories and make sure that all of these United States senators, these Republican United States senators, are hearing from their constituents, understand the high cost. And that also means continuing to communicate with those, U.S. representatives in Congress, because it's going to go back to them at some point. And so we got to make sure that they are very wide open about what they're about to do to their constituents, and maybe we can stop them from doing it. And I guess the other thing is, as Governor Kelly said, we can't lose faith. We got to stay in it. And that looks different for every person, but every one of us can play a role. We don't all have platforms like Governor Kelly and I do, but every one of us has a constituency of people who love you and respect you. And so organizing and speaking out and speaking truth to power and living our values, I think that's the way that we get through the hardest of times. I see you and I appreciate you, and I'm really glad that you tuned in, and I hope that you will continue to raise your voices.
This has been a special broadcast of the MeidasTouch Network. I want to thank Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, Governor Laura Kelly of Kansas for sharing this time with us and letting them know what they are doing to fight back, protect their state, and stand up against this disastrous budget bill. We appreciate you both for joining us.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Everybody hit subscribe, and let's get to that 5 million subscribers this week.
Can't get enough Meidas? Check out the Meidas Plus Substack for ad-free articles, reports, podcasts, daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, and more. Sign up for free now at MeidasPlus.com.